Hey, welcome back to another episode of Detection at Scale. This is season 3. In season 3, we're talking about the intersection of security operations and AI. And today, I'm excited to introduce Matt Muller to the show. Matt, how are we doing?
Doing fantastic. How about you?
As we were just talking about, we're both fully recovered, I think, from Black Hat and B-Sides 2025. So
Barely. It's questionable still, I think, a little bit, but
it is,
we're getting there.
yeah, I don't know how many more Las Vegas conferences I can take, but I just need to balance it out with a few miles of running, and I think that trades off the amount of secondhand smoke that I inhaled.
Exactly.
But yeah, thanks for coming on. This actually came out of Black Hat. We were all sort of hanging out at the conference, and was really excited to bring you on. So Matt is field CISO at Tynes, which is also a company that I've been very close with for many years. So yeah, Matt, why don't we just kick off brief background, what you've been working on the last few years, and then what you're working on now at Tynes.
Yeah, so been doing various sort of security things for, a decade and change at this point. More recently, I was the head of security operations over at Coinbase, helping them scale from, basically a 3-person SecOps team, including myself and a lot of pager duty. It's, a global follow the sun, a 24/7 organization. And ironically, this is where I first got introduced to some of the tools that I would consider to be critical parts of building out my SecOps stack. It wasn't Panther; it was actually StreamAlert. Where I first, I was thinking about it before this conversation. I was like, I think I've been using various pieces of your code for probably like 7 years now, and it's been great to see that evolve. And of course, seeing StreamAlert and then Panther and becoming a Panther customer, and then ultimately a Tynes customer as well. I was sort of really immersed in, building what I would hope would be a reasonably effective security operations team. And so, of course, was doing that as a practitioner for that whole time. And then at a certain point, Tynes came knocking, and they said, "Hey, we're hiring for a field CISO role. Are you interested?" And had a lot of respect for the team over here at Tynes, and so I said yes. Also, by the way, what's a field CISO? Long story short, I get to work with a whole bunch of people now across our customer base on automation and AI strategy as it relates to their cybersecurity programs, right? And thinking about these tools not just as sort of, mysterious magic technologies that we throw at a problem and hope it goes away, but an actual strategic competency that they can start building out, and sort of thinking about we're not just going to do the same old things before, but now with robots, we could actually reimagine what it means to, build a security operations function and team with the new, data primitives and automation primitives and AI primitives that are now available to us that we just didn't have a couple of years ago. So it's an exciting role, man. And I'm just, really happy to be able to do things like this now, and chat about some of the hard fought lessons along the way.
And that's what we're looking forward to today. So talk a little bit about the AI strategy piece. So what are you seeing people sort of broadly evolve into right now when it comes to SecOps?
When we talk, I almost said the history of AI, but we're talking about 2 years, right? Or 3 years. And, some of the condensed timeframes when it comes to AI are pretty wild. But, it's been, when we first saw ChatGPT come on the market, I think the instinctual reaction for a lot of SecOps folks, honestly, including myself, was, how do we figure out how to ban this, right, in the organization? There wasn't even a thought of how do we apply this in a security context. It was, man, security's job is to make sure nobody uses this crazy new tool that seems dangerous and that we can't figure out. And then, as things tend to do, I saw, a pretty big swing in the opposite direction, which was, oh man, I think we can start replacing humans with AI. Or maybe if we can't today, the next model release surely will be the thing that replaces the entire tier 1 in the SOC, right? Right? And that hasn't come true as well either. And so as I talk today with, CISOs and security leaders and practitioners, I think consensus is sort of arriving at, AI assisted humans are going to be the ones who are most successful. AI with guardrails is going to be, I think, the path forward for the foreseeable future. And, figuring out sort of the right problem spaces to go apply AI in is now sort of the next topic of conversation, right? And, to me, I think the practitioners, faster than the vendors, have kind of sobered up in sort of thinking about how they're going to use AI, right? At the end of the day, they're not looking for product X now with AI. they're looking to solve a problem. And, especially in the security operations space, you get a really tight feedback loop on figuring out if something is solving your problem or not, right? Like adversaries don't give you the benefit of like, oh, we're going to run an extended proof of concept, try again, see what happens, tweak, try what happens, see what happens, right? Like, nope, they're just going to keep attacking you anyway. So yeah, it's been, and again, all of this has been happening at incredibly rapid speed. As I'm sure, you've been following along, right? Like we don't even have time to figure out chatbots before we have to figure out agents, before we have to figure out MCP, before we have to figure out the next big thing. And yeah, it's been a pretty wild journey. But overall, I think people are starting to sort of realize where AI is incredibly effective and where maybe it's, a hammer in search of a nail.
Love the intro. Yeah, I mean, you hit it right on the head in a lot of ways. We're evolving at breakneck pace, you could say. One of the things I'm curious about, so you said agents, MCP, said a lot of good things there. Let's talk about MCP. So MCP, if you've never heard of this protocol before, it's called Model Context Protocol. It's developed by Anthropic. And the whole purpose of it is to be an intermediary between the agent, which is the goal-based LLM, and then the SaaS tool that has your data, has your tools. It's like a standard interface. And the benefit that we've seen there is just a massive explosion of these tools. So now effectively there are thousands of MCPs, maybe tens of thousands of MCPs out there, which is, good and bad. And MCP kind of had a bad security rap, as I think we all know, just because it was very primitive, but like all things, they start insecure and get better over time. Anyways, what are you seeing in terms of people adopting MCP? And is there a particular solution with Tines that you've been observing as you look inside of a lot of these security teams?
Yeah, it's funny, when MCP first launched, we sort of took a look, and of course, the joke at the time was, the S in MCP stands for security, and so we kind of felt that we have an obligation to our security first customers to make sure that whatever they're implementing, they get safe by default, and so we've taken a little bit of a wait and see approach to make sure that the technology actually does what our teams need it to do reliably, right? Because our mission is to power the world's most important workflows. And I don't think anybody, as they're thinking about their most important workflows, wants that seed of doubt in the back of their mind that something might go wrong. And so today, we have, some implementations where, our AI agent capabilities do have tool access, but it's implemented sort of in a little bit more of a Tines, specific way versus sort of, throwing MCP solutions at it. Now, we are bringing, MCP integrations and capabilities to market. But in my view, I think there's actually a lot of second mover advantage when it comes to some of these like brand new AI capabilities, where there's a lot of stuff that's just super cool to see people experimenting with. And we want to enable that experimentation. But at the same time, when it comes to actually putting things into production use cases, do we have the right guardrails in place? And so, where I think we're starting to see folks, with all the new security guardrails that, are being introduced to the protocol, I think we are seeing folks start to use it a little bit more in sort of, production use cases. But it's a lot slower in terms of, how people are adopting it, at least within the Tines platform, right? And I think that is sort of due to the fact that, we do have these like, safe by default guardrails. That said, I think there's going to be a lot more conversations over the next couple of years about the MPC ecosystem. And, I do hope that Anthropic and the folks that are ultimately going to maintain this take that seriously, right? Because if you look at, for example, the Node.js ecosystem, which has sort of sprung up pretty organically over time, there's a lot of security concerns, right? And there's a lot of issues, and I won't pick on like Node.js is the only software ecosystem that has these issues, but it certainly feels pretty common to see, new malicious Node package published, right? Like new, out of the 1,000 imports in your, the single thing that you thought you were importing, 500 of them have various levels of vulnerability. And so, where I hope Anthropic does continue to push things is in the direction of creating a safe ecosystem by default, because ultimately at the end of the day, We absolutely need to be providing those things. And, if you have, an unmaintained ecosystem that it's also difficult to reason about because you're using, probabilistic integrations, or maybe, allowing an AI agent or model to sort of like cascade MPC, server selections, that could be an interesting and potentially risky world, right? If you're in the SecOps space. So yeah, I don't know. I think, I think it's something that I'm looking forward to see how it evolves over time.
Yeah, I think the wait and see approach makes a lot of sense when you start thinking about production because there's still largely or a lot of things that aren't fully figured out. So, as I think we're all aware, the auth-z auth-n story is not great by default. It is getting better. They have rolled in OAuth, which is nice. And
Yeah.
I know that Anthropic had published also planned to do an official registry for their MCPs. So that should at least bring a little bit of safety. There's still the, scanning of the MCP servers, making sure that there's no malicious tool call or malicious instructions. And yeah, there's definitely a lot of learnings that we're getting over in building that. But I would advise people to at least look at it right now. Like look at it locally, run some MCP servers on your. By the way, I didn't tell you to use an untrusted MCP server, of course, but I am telling you if you trust the authors, like I'll give you one example. Amazon VS posted probably a dozen or so MCPs that's on their GitHub. And it's for just proxying into your account for things like IAM or S3 or, name a service. And it can really help you just try to understand where the world is going when it comes to agents, because again, agents are going to be plugging into the tools in a universal sort of capacity, and then we will direct the agents to do things on our behalf. Like that's kind of where the world is going, which is a great segue to pick your brain on modernization, because you said something before we started recording, which is you just see this whole tiered model of SOC going in a completely new direction with the advent of agents. And I think a lot of people are probably overwhelmed with that message in the last 2 years. So why don't we just talk about it pragmatically? Like, how are you thinking about this? What are you seeing? And like, how are you thinking about the slope of getting from where we are today, which is maybe human-based, deterministic runbooks, to agent-based, decide on the fly, and good luck.
I think it's really fascinating to me that the tier one SOC analyst, right? What we sort of traditionally see as the most junior, person in the security operations org, is also the one who we task with making the most decisions, at least in a traditional SOC model, because they're triaging every single alert that they can and determining whether, in fact, we got a true positive or false positive on our hands. And then in a lot of organizations, we're doing the worst possible thing, which is having them hand off the consequences of that decision, right? Because once you have a true positive, once you've determined that malicious activity has happened, it's often a tier two or potentially even tier three team member who's actually going to do incident response, right? Who's actually going to do cleanup and forensics and all that sort of stuff. And, I think this sort of makes sense in a world where the SOC is completely overwhelmed, right? If you think about sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of SOC needs, alert triage is right at the base. If you've got a blinking red light and you've got SLA timers that are ticking down, you're going to just be plowing through that alert queue as fast as possible, handing it off as fast as possible. And the people you hand it off to are going to be handling those alerts, right? And handling the investigation and response steps as fast as possible. And so that doesn't really leave room for things like teaching and learning and experimentation and all the things that as security professionals, we absolutely need to be doing in order to, not just advance our own careers, but like advance the team's mission, making sure that we're defending the organization as the organization evolves. You mentioned sort of like playing around with MCP. I'm like thinking about a world where, let's imagine, in like 2003, 2004, an Exchange admin is refusing to use Gmail in their personal life because like, oh, what use will I ever have for Gmail, right? Today, there's a really solid chance that your company might be using Google Workspace, and the fact that and like eventually you would have had to learn Gmail, right? But in the SOC, I'm not sure that we always give people those opportunities to go learn the new systems that are being brought online, and so you end up in this really vicious feedback loop of having to painstakingly triage alerts that you get with very little context or very little understanding of the underlying system. We can't afford to let junior team members carry those alerts to their logical conclusion, right? Because we don't have the learning materials for them to use. It's all just sort of like hand off and hope we keep our heads above water. And so then let's imagine what an AI, AI assisted and agentic world starts to look like. It's not just about replacing the triage that tier one agents are necessarily doing. I think a world where senior analysts and senior engineers are taking the time to go learn new systems, figure out the run books that they would use, right, to go do incident response or investigation of a particular alert in a particular system. AI can do a really darn good job of picking up, a relatively like bare bones run book, right? And using that to contextualize something for a junior analyst. And now you're not just sort of asking a generic foundational model to assist you with triage, right? It may hallucinate, it may not. And if you don't have the system knowledge, you're not going to be able to tell the difference when the AI is lying to you. When you start to decorate that with context from your own organization and from your own senior team members, now this becomes a little bit more of an extension, right? To be able to say, hey, junior analyst, it's this type of alert in this system. 9 times out of 10, here is how it was handled before. Here's what our senior analysts would typically recommend doing. Go follow these steps, right? And then you still have that human in the loop to be able to say, that seems right for the scenario, or that doesn't, or I could still use an additional helping hand. But we can actually have our tooling be a mechanism for empowering our more junior folks to like actually learn, right? And advance their own careers. And our more senior folks aren't just handling escalation after escalation. They're able to go learn new things, learn the new systems, figure out how to defend them, and then move on and rinse and repeat and keep on learning, which to me feels like a lot healthier of a model for the SOC than, this sort of just like throw it into somebody else's queue and hope they pick it up.
Very, very interesting. I really liked a lot of what you just said. I'm still processing it all. I totally agree with everything. Human in the loop is super critical. Diving into the tools and using it as a way of up leveling the team is also really critical. And I I would love for the whole community to embrace AI in a real way. There's a lot of people who, I mean, like every technology adoption lifecycle, right? It's the bell curve. There are the people who are just the late adopters or the people who will never adopt in the, final quadrants. And then you have the people who are excited and the technology enthusiasts and the early adopters. And I would hope that security starts embracing it more and not just looking at it as a buzzword that a vendor's trying to sell you on, but look at it for what it is, which is a intense amount of time savings. This is speaking from personal experience. I literally made a post today where I was like, I don't think I ever want to write a SQL statement again because what's the point? Like my, our MCP server, which, we've been very active on because it's a total game changer for writing rules, for triaging alerts, for doing investigation. It has taught us so much about the right ways of interfacing with security data and the right ways of triaging alerts reliably without hallucination. And, you can't always prevent it, but if you have the right context and you think about context engineering as just like, what set of data do I need to connect my agents into? Like that is very effective today. And I think most people are too skeptical to try it, but I'm like trying to pull people into this world. But like, how would you think about the tier ones and the folks who might be a little bit more junior or starting off in their career? Like, what advice would you give them of starting to get their initial experience with AI, start to learn how to be effective? Like, what would be your system for telling them what to do first?
I like to demystify anything I can before I actually start using it, right? It's like we're all in cybersecurity. And so even if we're on blue team, we inherently like figuring out how stuff breaks. And so, with any sort of AI model or implementation or tool that's available to me, I will take a subject or topic or problem that I know very, very well, that I know the correct answer to, and I will see how long it takes to break the AI, right? And this doesn't actually prove anything, right? We all know systems can be broken. So it's not about saying like, ha, gotcha, we figured out where there's an edge case, right? I'm like, I've got news for you folks. If you look at the number of O days out there, there is plenty of deterministic code that has edge cases and gotchas that, like we run into every single day. But I think helping people sort of avoid falling into the fallacy of AI doesn't know much about something I know very well, but it knows a lot about things I don't know, right? Like in the same way that, you read a newspaper article and it's like, oh man, they got this thing that I know well kind of wrong, right? But I trust them on this entirely other topic, right? That's a fallacy I think we fall into a lot. And so being able to sort of learn how to validate the AI's outputs, I think is going to be a hugely important skill. And this is where, I think AI as a tool for more senior folks and more experienced folks is incredibly powerful, and one that, maybe actually should have more guardrails when we give it to the junior team members. I've actually never wanted to write a SQL query, but I've written enough of them that I can now understand and troubleshoot when, I get one generated for me. And, like, oh, right, like I know that that's not the correct table, right? Or like it would actually, I know that this index exists, and it would be a little bit more efficient if we use that instead. And so I can, again, without ever having to write this 150-line SQL query, be able to guide the tool to do what I want it to do. And that's what it's all about, right? Figuring out the limitations of your tool that you have available to you, figuring out how to guide that tool and get the most out of it. And that's just a generic skill that, I think folks actually need, regardless of whether they're using it in, an AI context or not.
Yeah, I always say the best communicators are the ones most successful with LLMs.
Exactly.
It's true, right?
Yeah, turns out all those communication skills that we were told were important actually are. Who knew?
You have to express your feelings,
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much to digest here, right? There's so many things rapidly evolving, but it is very promising. And the GPT-5 release is a very interesting thing when it comes to capability, right? Like where we think the capabilities will ultimately go. But I just keep coming back to context, right? Context is probably more important than the foundation model to a degree, right? Like we'll see where we are in the next few years and how the scaling laws play out. But I just continue to believe that if you learn how to prompt engineer, if you connect the right data sources, and you have very succinct targeted agents, you can do a lot of damage.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of people start with a way too ambitious introduction to, things like AI tooling. I was trying out Cursor the other day and I was like, write me this app. And of course, the thing that it produced was absolute garbage nonsense, right? And I'm like, I don't know why I expected any different. But I've learned to be a little bit more patient and to decompose the problem. When you're throwing AI at a series of small problems, it's so much more effective, right? Because it can reason about these smaller problems a little bit more effectively. And you, in turn, can reason about the AI's reasoning a little bit more effectively. And, I think for folks that are trying to introduce AI into the security organization, making sure that like team members, whether junior or senior, have that, that shared learning context of like, here's how to approach the problem versus just, giving them a tool blindly and saying, I trust you to go figure it out. Right. Like, I think there's enough of us grumpy security practitioners out there who'll be like, I tried it, didn't work. Right. And, if you tried it maybe a little bit of a different way, you'd have had some better success out of the gate. And so that introduction to AI tooling really, really matters.
I think this is a blog post that has to get written now that I think more about it, right?
Exactly.
I've done a few on like code gen for writing rules, which is good in tools like Cursor. And you can benefit a lot from Cursor rules and taking what's in your head in terms of good security, whatever that means for triage, rule writing, investigation, and starting to encode that into prompts. And I think that's a pretty good place to start for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look forward to seeing what, maybe eventually there will be like an MCP for like best practices with all of these different prompts and like tools, right? Like, let me go figure out how to go prompt and pull in all these best practices and train my AI on how to like train my AI. I don't know. It could get very meta very fast.
It does. Yeah. That's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah.
So let's talk about building with Tines with AI. So I know Tines has a few features related to agents. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you've been seeing customers create?
Yeah, absolutely. As we were thinking about how to integrate AI into the product, we actually had something like 50 different failed experiments because we knew we just didn't want to just sort of like slap AI on top and say, congrats, this is now Tines with AI. And the approach that we ended up taking was making an AI agent actually just another action that you can pull into a Tines workflow. So customers can now mix and match between, deterministic automation steps and agentic AI, feathered into that. So we have a pretty strict definition of what we think an AI agent is, which is, you have a goal that you give the tool. You have a set of tools that are available to it, and you let the AI figure out the best way to achieve that goal with the tools available. And it's actually surprising how controversial that definition is at times, because I think a lot of vendors say they have an AI agent and they actually mean they have a chat assistant. But that's our definition of what we mean by an AI agent.
It's the right one, by the way, what you just said.
Thank you. I'm glad. I'm glad we're on the same page there. But the approach that we've taken with AI is very much what we've taken with the rest of Tines, which is we will give you some strongly opinionated templates and then let you customize that however you want. Because the reality of workflow automation, whether it's with AI or deterministic automation, is that something like 80% of people's workflows are going to look very, very, very similar. It's that last 20% that is going to be very specific to your organization and your team and your needs. And so we've said, look, we're not going to make this a mysterious, black box implementation. Everything you import, you can customize, you can tweak, you can rerun, you can test, you can make sure that it actually does the things that you want it to do. And again, we're not trying to sort of compete with the different AI models or providers that are out there or have strong opinions about which ones you have to use, right? We allow you to connect your own AI model providers. We allow you to select between different ones for different tool use cases. Basically, our goal is to enable people to use AI as much as they want, where they want, with safe guardrails, versus saying, trust us, there's AI magic sprinkled over the top, and we'll figure it out, and you just have to believe that we're doing things the right way.
I think that's smart for a lot of reasons, because from what I'm hearing teams want is to still have the deterministic workflow steps and automation, but then for things that are less certain or much more opaque in terms of how to really go about taking the next step, I think the combination is a very powerful thing.
We've seen, so like a common one to convert from a deterministic workflow to agentic is phishing investigation, because I've seen people take a literal like 200 step workflow and convert it down to a single AI agent. Because that makes a lot of sense, right? Like phishing messages are the least deterministic thing you can possibly think of. And yet every security team has their like security at junk drawer full of potential phishing messages that have been reported to them. So it's an awesome AI use case, right? And like, maybe the flip side of that is people have a deterministic workflow that can, lock or isolate a production server. They're not turning it over to AI anytime soon. And I think that's totally fine, right? Because there are some, and like, I also would argue you shouldn't turn over that use case to a human. If you're talking about like critical production systems, that's actually too important for any non-deterministic system to go handle, whether that's a human being or an AI agent, right? So, I think for folks being able to pick and choose, what the right use cases are for AI with those sorts of guardrails, I think it ends up being a really powerful combination.
So, Matt, I want to wrap the show up today with 3 pieces of advice. So you've seen a lot in security throughout your years. You mentioned Coinbase and various other really great companies, and would love to just get your parting advice for those listening in on whatever you think is most useful right now for people to be thinking about.
I always come back to the fact that security just really boils down to communication. And whether it's chatting with your AI models or whether it's chatting with your end users, I think what I've learned over the years is that end users tend to be our best advocates when they understand what we want them to do. And, I mean, they're also a very noisy source of signal, right? So sometimes having them interact with an AI might be more helpful. But, just honestly, avoiding being seen as the team of no has gotten me more mileage with more people. It's helped me avert security incidents because people actually trusted that when they came to the security team, they were going to get thoughtful, like, here's how to accomplish what you want to get done. but safely, versus no, you can't do that, right? So I think communication skills are absolutely the number one thing that I hope more people in our industry focus on. And, again, I think just avoiding that reflexive, like, it's so easy when you're busy to just be like, no, right? Whether you're a parent or whether you're a security practitioner, sometimes it's just easier to say no, but it's not going to get you the right results over the long run. And those pieces where, building up those organizational relationships, I don't think we talk about it enough. We don't talk about it at conferences, certainly. We're talking about, we talk a lot about 0 days, but we don't talk enough about how do I build a relationship with the IT team so that when there is a 0 day, they actually proactively come to me about figuring out the right way to get that patched.
Communication, openness, relationship building, very non-technical things, but extremely important.
Yeah.
So I love it. That's great. Matt, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's awesome chatting with you and picking your brain on this stuff.
Yeah, Jack, thanks so much for having me. This was a blast. Really enjoyed it.
For blogs on this stuff, folks can go to detectionatscale.com or panther.com if you want to read some posts about MCP. We also have an open source MCP server. So if you have a Panther instance, I would highly recommend using our MCP to do a lot of the stuff that we talked about today. Obviously, if you're a Tines customer and a Panther customer, that's great. Experiment with some of the stuff Matt mentioned around inserting agents into your Tines workflows and just start learning and breaking, hopefully nothing too serious. Just break some of your non-production workflows just to kind of learn the edges of this stuff and just keep an open mind. And it's important, so important to invest early now in these technologies because they are changing the way that we do everything. So I will leave you all with that. And thanks again, Matt. It's great to see you.
Thanks so much. Likewise.